thing goes right.
In a perfect world, you would be able to take on everything that you want. But
like,
I mean, hey,
if the app works properly, if people don't drive like idiots on the road, if if people at my work do their job properly, and most of them do currently, but the previous job, right? If everything worked according to what they're supposed to and the expectation is, I'd be able to navigate this. Problem is, life ain't that way. So I have to learn that. So that's the number one mistake I think that I currently have is just I have to take off less and I have to learn to say no.
Hey, what's good, everyone? Danilo Elardi here. Welcome to the Within podcast by Adventures Within Media. I'm joined today with Vince Blaze.
What up?
And today we are on Coffee Chats, a segment where we have a personal conversation about a topic that we feel very passionate about. And today we are revisiting burnout. So for new listeners, this is actually a retrospective on part 1, which we released when, Vince?
Well, we released technically last month.
That's true.
In the time that this is being released, but we recorded back in March 2021. So.
Was it March? I thought it was January. January is when.
Wait, March? February. I think we recorded like end of February, early March.
Something like that. Holy jeez.
Yeah. It's been a minute is the conclusion that we're coming to right now. But yeah.
So just to contextualize things, if there's anybody here that doesn't or has never experienced burnout, the definition of burnout is a response to excessive or prolonged work-related stress characterized by exhaustion, negative or cynical feelings about one's work, which results in being less engaged and less effective at the job as a result. Right?
Right.
So we had talked last about burnout right in March, right?
Yeah.
So Vince, why don't you tell us about kind of like what we were going through 9 months? I don't know, 9 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like we were self-analyzing a lot at that time. And, that previous episode, if you guys have checked it out, we do talk about, and we've almost come to an epiphany, or at least I do, and we're bouncing back and forth on certain things and triggers and reasons why we think we're burning out. So one, if I can just premise this entire episode, I think that it's very important, and I'm very thankful for Danilo for having allowed me to do this throughout the year. But it's very important to really take time to assess. I would say sit in the feeling. Don't judge yourself too much in terms of like, I need to fix this right away. So it is important to sit in it because otherwise you make quick decisions. You find the wrong answer and then you send all your energy to the wrong direction kind of thing. But it's also important to reflect and to be able to get an outside perspective that isn't condescending or isn't negative and isn't
for sure
in any way, shape, or form making you feel diminished. And that comes with a lot of work. Danilo and I have spent a lot of time talking and a lot of times where it wasn't really easy or as open as it is currently.
Right.
But I think that that's one of the big parts that I would like to just premise the entire episode and I guess entire podcast really, or coffee chat segment.
Hey, well, you know what? I'd say that's more of a foreshadowing of the conclusions and the things we've learned over the years, which we will touch on. But first, I think we should kind of like contextualize where we were at like
100%.
a while ago, or actually not even a while ago, back in March when we recorded part 1. So Vince, you want to tell us a little bit about where we were at or where you were at, like in terms of where you were in terms of dealing with burnout? Yeah.
So just historically, I think that I've always been put into a position where work was expected. It was, very difficult for me to get away from work, and I defined myself and my value as per what I was able to accomplish and create.
Right.
And so after a few years of, really pushing towards content creation, music, and having failed at that, quote unquote failed, I then switched over to video and then put a lot of time into that. And finally we're coming into a pandemic situation, which I thought, like everyone's like, it's pandemic, you gotta take advantage. Worked a lot during the pandemic to try to do free gigs and a lot of opportunities, which led me into January 2021.
Right. Can I just say that, first of all, me and Vince were among some of the luckier people during the pandemic that were able to consistently find work during that time, because I mean, of course, there were people who were running out of work or just straight out being, let go of or fired. So,
yeah, good point.
Yeah.
And a lot of this podcast is going to sound almost like we're complaining, or at least on my end. So take this with a grain of salt. This is just me being authentically trying to reflect on this. So back to January 2021, I managed to get one of the biggest opportunities of my life, while I'm also trying to launch a podcast. For the first time, having 2 employees under my wing and having to deal with working from home as a full-time job, at a full-time job, right? So the biggest opportunity was I was working to shoot an entire campaign for a government association here in Manitoba. And we had multiple shoots outside the city. All of them were outside the city, actually. And then I had to edit it all during February. Without speaking illy of the team that was there, I was the least experienced, I felt like, in that environment, but I also felt like the processes that were being put in place for that was terrible. The gentleman that I was working with was overpromising everything, saying everything was going to get done when both of us were working a full-time job. It's not Danilo. I was saying yes because I didn't have the confidence to say no, this is not possible. And that's kind of going to be a recurring theme. But that kind of brought me into a major conflict because I was taking days off to just work on this, to do the shoots. At the same time, Danilo and I are trying to keep things together and put a podcast together, which some of you guys might have heard some of the first few episodes. And we came into it hot. We came into it early. We recorded, I think, end of November the year before that, and a few other episodes in December. And 2 of them didn't even air because we just came into it too hot, no preparation. So all that expectation, all that energy built, and we hit January and March, almost nothing came out in terms of actual releases from the podcast. Like, there were so many roadblocks. I was also having to deal with another employee as well. And it was just very difficult for me to navigate how to communicate properly with people and have them believe into the vision that I was trying to build together. And all that while doing a full-time job that I have no passion for.
Yeah, you should be honest about it, man.
Zero passion for it. It was very educational for me, and I'm very blessed to have had that opportunity during COVID, because COVID's a real struggle. But it just ended up, I kept pushing, and Danilo is such a good person that it was hard for me to just be like, Danilo, I can't do this anymore. And so all those things were coming together. And it's funny because we talked about burnout. We were talking about it, and we actually recorded an episode. Like we said, the previous one you hear on this part 1 is actually an episode we recorded. And we ended up, because I was burnt out, because we were both burnt out, we didn't even be able to release it or finish it, just because it was
ironically, right?
It's sort of hypocritical in a sense of like we're trying to talk about. But again, I think this is the point of the podcast, is to talk about stuff openly without judgment, right?
For sure.
So that's kind of the situation just in me personally in workload. Obviously, sure. I had also gone through like some major like emotional traumas at the time. State of mind, I was still on the grind, but not understanding the difficulties of everything that's happening.
Right.
Relationship wise, I just said I broke up with someone previously during the year, and pandemic lockdown caused me to spend a lot of time alone, which I recommend to anyone, but it does create a little bit of a difficult world to navigate inside your own head.
Yep.
And workplace, on top of that, my workplace was very toxic, absolutely toxic. The people there, very disgusting, and it's just not a good environment. So that's kind of the state that I was in at the time, sure. January 2021.
Sure.
How about you, Ro?
I'm going to take this starting with, I suppose, my workplace. So COVID hits and workload increases exponentially. Everyone's fighting over toilet paper. Everyone wants to buy everything in the store that I'm working at. I'm not going to name the store, by the way. But this results in basically me working more overtime hours with very little support coming from higher management, let's just say. That was just as an overarching effect going into the rest of the week, I would be coming out of my days with less and less energy, while at the same time, because me and Vince are tackling all these new things, having an increasing my workload outside of work. Mind you, this is contextualized by also navigating a lot of new frontiers, working at the time. By the way, prefacing this by saying when we were doing Burnout Part 1, me and Vince actually had a employee-employer relationship, which I think did actually add a little bit to the strain for the both of us, because Vince was navigating how to be an employer, but also how to be a friend, right? And I was trying to figure out how to essentially meet his standards, because and this is something that has served me well, and again, more foreshadowing, but his standards are something that I had a hard time understanding at the time, right? So so those were my two work areas, and on top of that, like as a result, I kind of felt like, you know, my creativity in music and my other creative fields was also sort of like not being at its full potential, and of course COVID is overarching over all of this, affecting the way that we're able to see people, affecting that what we can do. And again, just like Vince, even though I've lived with my family, I'm spending a lot of time by myself, and most of the time I'm by myself, I'm just sleeping because I'm so tired when I'm not out there working and doing stuff with Vince, I suppose. And I guess with my relationships, let's just say somebody I shouldn't have let back into my life kind of came back, and I even after a lot of advisement not to do so and interact with this person, I still did, and hey, that added more to the strain. And yeah, so my state of mind was pretty much like, I'm not saying that I'm a very rebellious person, but I feel like I function best when I'm left to my own devices. And you know, here I was navigating this new environment with Vince, where he's essentially determining what I'm supposed to do for most of our projects, which in hindsight, I don't really even want to say I had a lot to complain about, because they did eventually have, you know, good intentions and good results behind them. But I'm just the kind of guy who's kind of just like, you know, F this, I don't want to listen. You know what I mean? And so I'd say that's where I was 9-ish months ago. Now that we've kind of both said our piece, though, I think we should talk about where are we now. It is now currently December 2021. We're just about in the thick of winter, and as of right now, we actually just had some new restrictions announced for Manitoba, where we live, that limits gatherings just on the precipice of Christmas. Although we've been able to enjoy a relatively free summer and fall, thank goodness. So Vince, gonna hand it back to you. Where are you now in terms of your burnouts, and in terms of, you know, kind of where you are with the status quo?
Yeah, and one, I think we're doing this whole contrast thing for people, well, for ourselves as well, but
right.
to be able to understand the difference. And obviously there is progress, and
right.
I think that a lot of our burnout came from us not acknowledging progress. For
sure. Yeah.
So
another overarching theme.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that one of the things that's very important, again, is just acknowledging that and taking time to go through and, you know, identifying what some of the factors were and what are they now. And like,
sure.
You know, if I to answer your question, currently I feel like I'm still burnt out. I'm tiptoeing in and out of it. I'm finding out more and more what actually makes me more sane, less exhausted, less more fulfilled, which is funny because, again, it goes back to the definition of what is burnout. And I currently I'm trying not to see I'm not trying to see me as being burnout. I'm trying to see myself as I'm learning. And remember that I showed you the other day, my favorite new word is called crucible. Right.
Yeah.
And this whole concept of having a major challenge. So sorry, give you guys context. I read a book. I'm reading a book currently. It's called the 10 HBR. It's must reads, and it's like all the academic journals, the top 10 academic journals on burnout, on mental toughness,
Right.
put together, and they kind of give you all the sweet spots. In which book they define a new word called crucible, which is a sort of challenge and activity that challenging time that takes a lot of energy from you and puts you through a lot of stress, but you come out of successfully. And having learned something and learn more of who you are. So I think that I'm seeing it more like that. I'm seeing more like, oh, I'm burnout. No, I'm seeing it more currently like, okay, this is something that's trying to show me something. It's showing me who I should be, who I want to be. And yeah, so that's kind of my status quo in my relationship with burnout, if I can put it that way.
Okay, yeah.
I'd say, again, I'm tiptoeing in and out of it. I'm finding more, as I complete more of my to-do list and things that I have backlogged, I'm getting more relief, more
for sure,
more air, and more like, okay, I have time to actually go and take a run, go to the gym and make music,
right?
So that's currently my status quo with burnout.
Okay.
How about you?
Let's see. I'm gonna really split this up into two main categories because they essentially, for me, I determined that burnout comes mostly from where your work is most, like, where you work, essentially, right?
Okay.
And I essentially work in two places. I work at my full-time job, and I work in the creative field as well, right? Okay. So I'm gonna start with the negative. My workplace, I would say I'm still burnt out. Or at least I'm re-entering burnout because essentially from like a workplace standpoint, like it's getting hectic over there. Christmas is around the corner, and then even after Christmas, January, like you're not out of the oven yet, right? And there's been a lot of changes at work, change in management, change in expectations, inadequate help. Half the time, like I feel like I'm not heard or listened to, but I still get up every morning and go to work and put in my 8 hours. It's just you don't come home after a shift or environment like that thinking like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go back to work tomorrow, kind of thing, right? And the thing is, like, to contrast, like in the past, I used to feel very proud of my work, like, you know what I mean? But when you're essentially working harder for essentially little return, and at this point many people would be like, well, why isn't he getting the heck out of there? Well, that's something I'm still trying to navigate, but yeah. But that's at least if I was going to say I was burnt out anywhere in the categories that we had gone over, that being workplace relationships and the creative field and all that stuff, I would say at least in my workplace, I feel like I'm still a little burnt out, or at least getting burnt out, right? Because it's just the workload has not decreased, and it never will because it's a day-to-day thing, right? But from a creative standpoint, from the other things that I've been doing, I can happily say that I don't think I'm burnt out anymore. If anything, I think I've learned to sort of thrive from our experience initially in the beginning of the year. And a lot of that comes from the fact that, like, I want to say that I acclimated to what was necessary to achieve, I would say, success and gratification from what we were doing, and what I'm doing personally as well. One of the big changes that it's like, and ironically, after me and Vince kind of like took a break from Ami for a little bit, I ended up starting my own podcast,
which you guys should go check out. It's called Before Zero Podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Before Zero Podcast. Yes,
shameless plug.
And I kind of went about things my own way, discovered my own like way to run a podcast, and here I am 11 episodes later in a very short amount of time, and it's been a very fulfilling experience, right? But part of that acclimation or acclimatizing, I'm not sure which is the right word, comes to, and I'm gonna kind of like call back to part one where you talk about the brain as a muscle. Yes, it was a stressful experience, but I think because of that, my brain, if you're thinking of the brain as a muscle, accumulated the strength to deal with, that new environment or that new set of tasks or that new mindset that I'm so graciously thanking Vince for helping impart onto me. Right. And yeah, so I kind of feel like, especially Vince knows, like in the fall, I was feeling especially just like, I mean, I'm not making as much music right now. And a lot of that is because, hey, November, December are super busy for other reasons other than being able to be creative. But for most of the summer and the fall, Vince saw me do a lot of creative stuff. And I think I was maybe at the top of my game, and probably the top of my game for the most I've been for like quite some time. And I think you can attest to that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in terms of where burnout is. Some good, some bad. But I think overall, at least I can, when I'm not at work, I can enjoy where my life is at and what I'm doing, which I'm very thankful and happy for.
Yeah. And I mean, again, putting into context that like, again, we're going into potential, well, we never came out of lockdown here in Manitoba.
No.
We're just always in lockdown. Definition of lockdown is now varying. We're now reducing numbers, etc. With the new variant that has come through again, seems almost like a rinse repeat of last year.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how that's impacted. Like, I think that impacted a lot, and personally my attitude when going into like, oh, I got to work.
Right.
And and we were talking about, Danilo had this little chat about like how when there's the flight or fight mode, I felt like previously, at least it was a lot for me, I was to fight. And Danilo was more of the flight, regardless of whatever that means. I was more of like, oh, I just need to push harder. Get more gigs. You know, I need to just do this, and this. And like, you were more like,
I'm out. See you later.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally. Like that's how it was. And I think neither are good, neither are bad. I think that in the way that I was handling my fight, like, I think that like I would like to be the person to fight, but I think that I was fighting every single battle instead of choosing some to be like, I'm out of here, you know?
Yeah.
And that's where I think that my lack of being able to assess what I actually want to do and which battles I want to fight, I think it was crucial. And that's one of the things that we've learned
for sure.
Through this whole thing. So we'll dive into that a little bit later, in terms of what we've actually learned. But yeah, just again, keeping in mind like the whole context of like, we're still in a pandemic, we're still navigating the creative world. Things are like opening and shutting down, and nothing is coming out as being fulfilling. Things are being fulfilling, but also, I think also like Danilo, it's still funny because we talk like we've been friends for like 20 years, but like we literally sat down here this morning and we're like, dude, like we started talking October last year.
Yeah. Right.
So when you put things in perspective, Danilo becomes an employee in January last year of me while we're still learning to be friends. So one, Danilo has zero respect for me. I have zero, like, obviously we had respect, but like zero respect for me, zero respect the other way. Communicating is just impossible at that point, you know? And, you know, we've got very different goals, very different like expectations, etc. I think so that drove a lot of like, I think the relationship burnout in my opinion, like the friendship barrier between us two. But I also think that like, that's what's allowed us now to be a little bit more like, okay, we're a little bit burnt out, but I'm okay navigating this, you know, like there's less of like the emotional strain, at least in that point. So like if Danilo has a tough day at work, you can come see me, right? You can come talk to me. You call me and like, man, remember the other day there's something happening, you know, at home, and you're like, dude, I just need to get this off my chest, and like, you know, stuff like that. So now there's one less thing to worry about, if I can put it that way.
Right. Yeah. Just to contrast that, well, not contrast, but I do feel like back then, if we had problems, it almost felt like our personal problems, we would kind of shelf them, right? Because we were worried that it would affect our work. Right. I do feel, and for Vince and I, for several different occasions, it would bubble up and then just wait until it reared its ugly head. And then we're just like, okay, this is absolutely a problem and we need to take care of it. And for my example, I want to use that, like, let's say that person I should have been talking to back in there, and Vince is saying, hey man, don't talk to her. Like, you know, don't deal with it. Like, I did. And then it finally got to the point where it was actually affecting me emotionally to the point where I couldn't perform adequately for the company. And of course, that's how it reared its ugly head. And just to touch on what you said about, like, you know, like we both might be still going through burnout, but I mean, the thing is, we were both going through it individually, and you do go through it individually, but I think we learned like how to be better friends to each other. And so at this point, we don't have to go through burnout alone, like you said, and it's better to go through it together than alone. Like, you know, it's just much easier to navigate, especially when your compasses are both pointed in the same direction, I would say.
Yeah. And I think there's also like this portion of that. I want to touch back on that point with the girl thing, but there's portion of communicating that's also the accountability, because something that we often talk about is that I don't want to, like, our discussions to just be like a hype man in the back being like, yeah, it's like, don't do that, girl. You don't talk to him. Like, that's not what we're about.
Guys, I've been waiting for him to do that the entire podcast because he said he was going to.
Yeah, because it's true. Because, like, again, I am placing judgment, but I just don't like it when women are like, I love when women support each other because, you know, I love it when anyone supports each other because they put each other, everyone goes through tough stuff.
Right.
But when I feel like it's a little bit of a negative, you had a term for it last time, but it's a little bit of a negative, like when you're just like, yeah, don't talk to him, when you haven't even heard the entire story, and the person who's telling you the story might have hidden a lot of I'm just using a couple situation, but they might have hidden a lot of what they're actually talking about. And like, I'm more of like, okay, let's go find out why this is happening. Like, why are you struggling with not being able to say no to this person? Like, what's going on? Are you insecure? Why are you insecure? You know, like, I'm like straight to the point. I'm like, let's go. And I think at first Danilo was like, who the heck is this guy? Like, why, who do you know about my life? Like, what do you know about my life? And, yeah. And it was frustrating to me to not being able to help, because I just want to help all the time. But also it's like, I don't know. I feel like that I just want to avoid that scenario. That's like always my mission. I don't want to be like, just like, yas in the background.
Yeah. And I mean,
there's times for that.
I think the term you're looking for is like a positive feedback loop that ends up in a negative situation, right?
Yeah.
Is when somebody's encouraging, essentially,
it's like negative reinforcement.
You know
what I mean?
It's like negative reinforcement is like, yeah, it's like, that's like, yeah, you do something and you suffer a negative consequence, so you don't do it, right? But then positive feedback loop is you experience something, like somebody says, yeah, you know, like, you know, somebody is a yes man for you, so you keep doing something because you're getting positive reinforcement from it, but it might not necessarily be what you need to do. It might, you know, you might need to have been steered away from that behavior, which in my case I needed. And so what you're saying is essentially is like, I didn't need somebody in my corner being like, yeah, go and talk to her, like, get it, you know, kind of thing.
Because you have that in your life.
Yeah. And I didn't need that, and you know, and I'm glad you didn't give that to me, but I also wasn't listening at the time, because we're not going to make this is a podcast about burnout, not about like how to navigate our relationships. Maybe we can have another podcast on that. But
leave us a comments if you want to hear that.
yeah actually, just short plug, like, but if there is a topic you guys want to hear us talk about, we would love to hear it in the comments. So if you can, like, you know, in the comments, or just leave us an idea if you want to.
Send us a DM if you don't have YouTube and you're not on YouTube, but just send us a DM, let us know. We have lots of ideas, but we also would like to know what you guys want to know, for sure, because if you guys are dealing with it, we're probably dealing with it too,
for sure.
You know, I just want to go back into what we were talking about, like how our discussion has, or how our communication has evolved over, because I think that's one of the biggest things that we've learned, to kind of segue into the next part of this episode, is what we've learned, right? And, you know, if, you know, it's good to reflect, but it's also good to acknowledge stuff that you've learned, because then you can imprint it and try to live by whatever those guidelines that you've set, and then rinse and repeat. You learn something else, you change that a little bit. And I think that's what learning is all about. And that's kind of how I've kind of tried to navigate this. But like, one of the things, you know, that's the biggest message, is like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, but having a neutral party, whether it's a counselor, therapist, or a friend, that you can build that trust with, and will give you honest critique, feedback, or a different perspective on something, but also empathize with what you're saying. And that I think is just very important, without judgment, without fear of being a failure or something. But I also think that requires one thing very much that a lot of people may skip out on, is honesty. Yep. And I would go further and, I mean, add to that and say, not just honesty with the person you're talking to, but honesty with yourself as well. 100%. Right. And that's I think that's the thing that I pulled out most from, I think we've grown most. For sure. Because, you know, I've got ego. Danilo's got his own form of ego. And, Danilo started saying like, oh, well, maybe I do feel like this. And then I'd be like, yes, finally he's saying it. Like I would not in a way that like, I'm like, oh, I get to bring this guy down, but like, finally we can talk about it. Finally we can, open that up.
Right.
And then when he started doing that, I started doing that more. I started being like, okay, I guess I'm being a little bit too harsh right now, and this is why, or whatever, or like, I guess I'm too hard on myself or whatever, and like, I just, stuff that I would never admit.
And I mean, like, you being harsh on, let's say me, whenever you would be, is also, I would argue, a reflection of how harsh you are on yourself, right? And that was something that we had kind of discovered and acknowledged the more we were able to be, again, honest with each other, right? Yeah.
So that's, I think, if we can go into kind of what we learned from this entire experience, and it's not like it's done, and I'm sure we'll have a part 3 at some point.
Pretty sure it'll never be done.
Yeah, like burnout is something, whether it's creative burnout, like we mentioned last time, or it's actual burnout, I think is something that I think is just to be mindful of, and, to not dive too deep into it. And I think that's kind of what the goal is for me personally, at least, but that's also a recommendation as well. But I kind of skipped ahead here. I kind of want to just go back and because it's a big point. That was like one of the underlying things for me for this year. But just looking at our outline here, mistakes that I've made through the year.
Okay.
I think that one thing that didn't change was I still have an enormous workload, if I can go that way. I have an enormous workload that I'm now realizing I cannot take on. And I was talking to my mother this morning, and I was telling her, I think the problem is I can operate at this level if everything goes right. The thing is, nothing goes right.
In a perfect world, you would be able to take on everything that you want. But like, I mean, hey.
If the app works properly, if people don't drive like idiots on the road, if... if people at my work do their job properly, and most of them do currently, but the previous job, right? If everything worked according to what they're supposed to and the expectation is, I'd be able to navigate this. Problem is, life ain't that way. So I have to learn that. So that's the number one mistake I think that I currently have, is just I have to take off less, and I have to learn to say no.
Yeah. For sure.
Number one mistake for me. How about you? What's a big mistake? Or
gosh, I don't want to say you stole my thunder, but then I do feel like similarly, that is one of the things, and this is one thing you said way earlier in the intro, but you said you didn't have the confidence to say no, right? And I feel like that's something I even still have trouble with. And I thought about this, and I wondered why sometimes when you offer something to me that like I deep down don't want to do, but then feel like I should be like, oh well, Vince, like the other day you wanted me to go running, and I like didn't want to because I'm just like, man, I'm just like so tired. But then I wanted to say yes because I wanted to, make you like, I knew overall good for your health. And 2, I wanted to, be like, I'm going to be a good friend and run with my buddy Vince, you know what I mean? And plus I, kind of been slacking on the running thing. As of this segment of the year, I mean, most of the earlier in the year is doing pretty good, but kind of falling off with the the winter weight coming around. But hey, that's something that we can change in the next quarter. Yep, there it is. That's Vince hitting his stomach, not me, by the way. But yeah, no, for sure. One of those things was, again, the confidence to say no. Although I don't have so much on my docket as much as Vince does, I still feel like I could better still choose my battles wisely. I don't have to say yes to everything. And I don't have as many concrete examples. I'm not taking on as much as you. But still, what I will say that I have learned, like as a contrast, is I have learned that, again, and you touched on this, it is better to have people that you can confide in. My problem in that was, I feel like I have, and Vince knows this, but I have a lot of different friend circles. You know what I mean? And I don't want to spoiler too much of like my conclusions when it comes to this, but like I felt like I was emotionally invested in several people in several of these circles, thus spreading myself out too thin.
Right.
And as you get older, you know that you have less time in the day. And so, and not to poop on anybody that I've had meaningful talks with in the past, but, I find myself finding it harder to dedicate an hour or two to a particular person, task, or thing, when I know that there's just so much to do and so much... Yeah, there's just so much to do. And so one of the things, and again, don't want to like spoil my conclusion here, but like one of the things
I've spoiled everything so far.
One of the things that I absolutely, I'm so happy that I've been able to establish this is boundaries. And boundaries for sure, I feel like have, and this is both emotional and physical boundaries, right? One of the results of that is like I've been essentially single all year, single throughout all of COVID. And I really do feel like it has been by choice. I do feel just a lot more, like probably in my entire life, the most comfortable I've been alone. Like,
that's what every single guy says. I'm just kidding.
Well, I find myself really just thinking, like sitting on it, sitting in it and thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, this is fine. Like I'm okay with this. And to the point where I don't see myself seeking or longing for an intimate relationship at the moment. Maybe by the time some of our listeners are coming upon this segment of the podcast, that might have changed. That might have changed, but we'll see. But as of right now, December 2021, I'm pretty happy being single. I'm pretty happy being alone, and I'm pretty happy with the relationships that I have with the people that I've chosen and the boundaries that I've set within my circles, and happiest within my closest inner circle. Let's just say, I think that was the biggest thing I learned in terms of like managing and navigating, all the things that we had to do, and two, trying to come out of and then manage burnout was, boundaries for sure. Between people and places and things has been my biggest takeaway for now.
Yeah. And one that's really powerful. And I think that having that self-reflection and ability to be okay with setting those boundaries, I think is crucial for anyone to avoid or not dive too deep into burnout, right?
For sure.
Because the problem with saying no is that, like, for example, like you said, running, it's good for you. You should technically say yes. It's like it's like a multiple choice question. Choose the better of, and they're all good, and it's like one's like 99%, the other one's 98%, and the other one's like 97%. And it's like, which one should you choose, right?
Right.
And that's why I think also one thing that I have started to learn more is just navigating what I'm saying no to and why I'm saying no to it, right? And having those internal discussions with myself, I think, is very important.
Right.
That's something that I didn't do before. I would just say yes, and I told you, literally, I had so much backlog, and I said, okay, December, I'm not taking on any gigs. Someone asked me, hey, can you take on this gig? What do? Say yes. Why? Again, having the discussion internally, externally, I think it's important for me to grow out of that, to learn from that. But that was a big mistake, was just not acknowledging that where that's coming from.
Right. And as somebody who's as closely intertwined in your life as I am happy to see that, maybe it took all the way to like the end quarter of the year, but when the other day you were telling me about this gig and you're just like, I had to turn the gig down, I'm just like, thank God he's doing it. He's finally beginning to redirect his attention to his backlog that and I'm not saying that if you ever eliminate your backlog, all of life's problems are solved, but it was definitely something that was an overarching problem for you, that you needed to turn into a challenge versus a problem, because it was just something that, again, one of the things, and calling back to part one, one of the things that you do is if something went wrong or you found an obstacle, what did you do? Start a new thing, right? But you becoming more aware of the gravity of that backlog and beginning to address it, I think, for me, from my perspective, was one of the biggest improvements, and I think is going to serve you well going into the future, for sure.
On just echoing what you're saying, but also building off of that, I think the mistake that I made and still make, but I'm working on, is I was defining myself as my work. you know. And I was listening to the Yes Theory podcast, which we referenced to last time again, and Anne Helen Peterson, who's the author of Can't, I think it's called Can't Even. But basically she says, like, we don't live to work, you know. And
right.
I was telling my boss this because they have an enormous amount of work right now. And I was telling them, you know, if you want people to come to work alive, you need them to allow them the time to come alive outside of work and bring that into work, right? It's almost like a relationship, and we're not going to dive into this topic, but
right.
Relationships, you have to have something that you're doing on your own so you can bring back together and bring fruit to, right? It's like a bee that's bringing pollen to, etc. And how does it grow? How do plants pollinate, right? How do they grow and how they spread? It's by bringing other stuff inside. It's like the hive of a nest of ants. They bring food, but there's so many parties and so many different things that are coming inside. A lot
of moving parts. Like
and that's one thing I think that we've improved the most on is as friends, we've allowed that to be something that we bring into. Like, I now say whatever Danilo has to say is important, and I'm allowing this in the discussion. Like, I'm actively making that choice instead of just being like, no, I don't want to listen to this guy.
Right.
I feel like Danilo's also doing the same thing, right? You're being like, okay, like Vince is actually caring for me, so he's probably got a good point. You know, someone's got good intentions, and that's one of the things I think we've improved on the most is allowing that, allowing outside sources to feed into our own.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it.
Mindset.
Yep, for sure.
Even identity, if I can go that way, that far. So yeah, that is just, we don't live to work. Going back onto what is, I define myself as work and as what I did. And if I said no to something, then I was a failure. If I said no to a gig, because again, pandemic, you know, all the pressures, etc. And like, even the way that Danilo looks at me, like, I would like him to see like, oh, he's got like all this stuff going on. So that way I motivate Danilo to do more.
Yeah.
You know, but that just motivated Danilo to do less because I'm just burning out every second day and he's seeing it. So, you know, kind of had the counter effect. But
admittedly, yeah, it was. And I will admit that was one of the things that I had trouble coming to terms with initially when we first started working together was like, man, like it's like he was trying. I felt like Vince was trying to impart his like ability to take on that workload onto me, and I was just like, that ain't for me, fam. Sorry. You know what I mean? But and I think taking the other direction of like me actually, and this is one of the biggest things because we talked about this before, but like ClickUp was one of my I don't know. I don't want to say I had PTSD from the app that we used to organize our notes and
so we utilize a project management software that is called ClickUp. If you're familiar to like Monday.com or Asana, it is similar but better. So y'all should join ClickUp. Just kidding.
This isn't a ClickUp plug, but sponsor us if you can, ClickUp.
Yeah, ClickUp, if you out there, man, I have gotten my entire company that I work for right now onto ClickUp. So y'all owe me some how do you call that?
Some sponsorship
fees?
monetization.
Yeah, some monetization fees. Yeah.
But going into ClickUp, and why I'm bringing this up is because back when I was getting introduced into it, and again I'm getting a new environment, a new virtual environment. I was just, I just felt inundated with the amount of task work and the amount of, and Vince, of course, micromanaging me because he's like asking if he can see the tasks. Hey, how are you doing on this? Which is kind of defeating the purpose of ClickUp because like it should be a way for me to let him know, hey, I'm doing the thing, right? We one of the things we had recently tackled in the summer was and even just right now, like formulating and structuring this podcast that we're recording right now, we used ClickUp extensively, and I am now in the I'm on the ClickUp boat now. Like, I love using it. I like join us. But part of that meant that I needed to change my mindset and understand how useful this thing was. Again, my mindset was like, someone's telling me to do something. and I'm going to be resistant to it. But now that I've kind of like embraced it and been like, okay, like I absolutely see. And maybe we could argue that like Vince spent all those months drilling how important it was into my head. And eventually he kind of broke through the cracks and was like, okay, I get it. But a lot of it was the
Never
intention.
gave up.
But a lot of it was the intention, right? It's not, I'm not pestering you to do this on ClickUp because I'm trying to be a nagging, like, get this done kind of person. You need to learn how to organize yourself because, again, call back to part one, maybe one of our first podcasts, like the New Year's resolution one. I was not an organized person. I was very wait and see, right? I feel like that's changed a little bit over since then, which I think. But for sure, organizing myself and coming to terms with intention and organization and the vision, was one thing that really helped me come along in terms of like converting the thing that was burning me out into now a very useful tool. And again, a tool that's helped bring this current podcast that we're recording to life.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I think that was like a big source of your burnout when it was also just I don't want to say insecurity, but that we didn't know each other, right?
Yeah, we
didn't know each other. So like being like, hey, can you do this? Like Danilo is probably interpreting like, oh, this douchebag's telling me to do something again, right? Well, meanwhile, like now it's more like, dude, like we got to do this.
Yeah.
And he gets it, right? So, and vice versa, like I've understood that like I can't just be like, hey, can you do this? I'll try to massage it a little bit more. And it was a source of my burnout because like I was like thinking again, if everything works, I can operate at this level,
right? But
it doesn't work by just me just saying do this. It doesn't happen, right?
Mind you, there was also 3 of us that you had to deal with,
correct,
like at the time.
Correct.
So
yeah. I want to tap into just a little bit more of the sources of burnout because I think my source of burnout was also, like I said, the not being able to say no, but also the fact that we were navigating, like we kind of said it already, but in so many new environments, like everything was new. And that's one thing that my dad has tried to teach me a little bit, but I clearly have not learned, is when you try to learn something new, pair it with something old. So for example, if you're trying to learn Japanese, pair it with a sport that you're doing. I know a lot about tennis. I can follow the game. Yeah. So I can learn things a lot quicker. He uses baseball as an example. That's how he learned English, was using baseball because he understood what a strike is and what a auto and what a double play is, right? So it's very easy to put reference into certain context, right?
Right.
But I think we did none of that at first. Everything was just new all the time. Like doing a podcast, new. Recording with, working with 3 people, new. And being an employer, new. And then all the gigs that I was doing, like the massive gig that I did in January, new, right? All this stuff was new. And although it has an element of familiarity because, talking isn't new to us, typing on a computer isn't new to us, recording isn't new to me, right? It was just extremely new in terms of like the entire premise of it all.
Right.
So I think that was one of the big sources of burnouts for me personally. It was just everything was new. And the problem that I had to face was that, and we kind of just talked about it before, was, I defined myself as someone who went out of my comfort zone all the time.
Right.
Like that was the premise I lived on because I said, I live by the quote, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone.
Right.
Right. But if you're constantly outside your comfort zone, one, it comes back to identity. Who are you? Like we were talking earlier.
Right.
But also you're just content. What are you learning? Because you can't even come back and be like, because one of the things that is very good to do is you choose one thing that you want to learn and then you add it in, learn one thing.
Right.
Kind of like we were talking about music, when I first started making music, I would add a new element. When you learn music, new song, we always add a new element. Right. We try to add, but we still come back to the basics that we know. It's not just like, oh, okay, new genre, new samples, new synths, new DAW, everything. Right. Like there's nothing that's going to come out of that, right?
Well, I mean, like my best example for that is like let's say you study for a test 2 days before a test and you ace the test. That doesn't mean you're an expert at the subject that you studied,
right?
Because you haven't internalized the information, right? You haven't made that information part of your repertoire. All you've done is regurgitated things.
Exactly.
Right. And I would say that is what I feel like had discovered was you needed to kind of like, yes, growth starts at the end of your comfort zone, but you need a comfort zone to grow from.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You know
exactly.
what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. So
you gotta spread your root. Or no, you gotta take roots before you can spread your roots. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, how can you? Because you go outside your comfort zone, you bring it in. Go outside your comfort zone, bring it in.
Right.
Kind of like the nest I was talking about earlier.
Right.
But if you don't have a nest to bring it in,
You gotta bring
in
it
the first
home.
place, right?
Gotta bring it home.
So yeah, I think I just wanted to touch on that because that's a big source of my burnout is having tied my identity to that quote. It's like almost like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, for sure. So were there any other sources of burnout you want to touch on, or?
Well, I think I don't mean, and we could spend years on this.
Yeah, I guess so. We hyperanalyze it.
One I think is just insecurities. Obviously, that's the huge one for anyone. I think not being okay with who you are, which leads to stuff like not being able to say no, right?
Yeah. For sure.
I'm insecure, so I need to go do something else to go prove myself elsewhere, right?
Right.
Going outside your comfort zone. So I think it all kind of stems from insecurity. At its core, if I can
That makes sense, yeah.
put it that way, and just manifests in different ways in your life and different habits.
No, for sure, yeah. Like it determines, I don't want to say a lot of the outcomes of like the direction you take, but I mean, it kind of does in a way, right? It does influence a lot of your decisions and how you want to make yourself out to be inadvertently, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about the mistakes we just touched on the mistakes we made and kind of like what we've done to improve on those mistakes, or just looking ahead to how we will deal with them in the future. Now, I guess we can talk about like what would we recommend in terms of, or what we've found that we could recommend to people who might be experiencing burnout or don't know that they are, so they can identify it, right? I want to take this for me in two standpoints because like I incidentally, like when I was doing my research, I was like, looking up articles. I'm like, oh, I'm already doing that, right? So, like one of the ones that I found a Forbes, basically a Forbes article that basically talked about like 5 ways to steer clear of burnout. And I'm not going to paraphrase them because it turns out that I was already kind of doing this already. But the big one for me, like if you are going through burnout or feel like you're about to, understand one, like you need rest. Like that was one of the big ones for me. And I think one for me too, like I have, and it's funny because as a kid, you kind of like dread this, but I have an allotted nap time most of the day. And I really do feel like it's hard to function without it nowadays, because at this point I'm just like, yeah, you know what? Like I've already come out of work and I just need to recharge the brain in order to be able to have a proper, like, let's say, meeting with Vince later on, or we have a little project later on, like in the day. Time management, as you get older, just becomes so much more important. That being said, I'm not saying that there's not room to be flexible in terms of like what you do with your time, but for sure, like allotting time for rest, or even a day off where you can just be like, all right, today I'm doing nothing, like, or at least doing anything but the things that I need to do. Right. Obviously take that with a grain of salt because you need to be able to like manage them accordingly. Right. I felt like rest has been one of the big ones for me. And then the second one, and then I'll let you chime in and talk about a couple of the ones you found. And I thought this one was super important, but understanding your needs. You know what I mean?
Literally going to talk about that.
Okay, well, then we can both expand on it. But I found what that meant for me was understanding what I needed to give myself in the moment. In terms of like whether like like for example, if I'm being overworked, then yes, that means I need to give myself some rest. If I'm dealing with a lot of tasks, I need to think to myself, well, what do I need to give to myself to, one, like accomplish these tasks, at least creatively, accomplish these tasks effectively, and two, make sure that I'm not like half-assing it, because that's the last thing I want to do is half-assedly complete a task and then have that show later on, because that's again a reflection, not an accurate reflection of the work you could do, right? Having to delve into what that meant took a lot of redefinition for me as time went on. But maybe you could actually kind of go into what you found in terms of understanding your needs, because I feel like you and I have a lot of similar but also different things that we identified as the needs that we needed to address.
Yeah, I think what I was going to talk about was, again, same thing, but defining your own rules. And I learned this through relationships,
right?
Because at first I was like, why, when you go into a relationship, everyone has expectations on their partner.
Right.
And you look at society and you're kind of expecting them to understand what you want. But a good example of what I'm going to talk about is Tom Bilyeu and his wife, Lisa Bilyeu. You can tell that they have gone through a lot of arguments, but they've also defined rules. And by rules, I mean they can be whatever you need them to be.
Rules or roles?
Rules.
Okay.
Rules.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you say a comment that is derogatory towards me, I expect you to pull me to the side immediately and apologize. You can put those rules, or you can say, okay, exception A, if you're in a meeting, then obviously we're going to talk about it later. Yeah. And we're like, right. If you want to say you owe me $25, like whatever you want to do it, but rules are like that. And I'm using a couple for example, but like personal rules, like for example, one of the things, I probably should have mentioned this as a source of burnout, but was investing into people that are not bringing me anything to my life. And it's hard because, some people bring a little bit, some will bring a lot of positive, but also a lot of negative. So
can I just add one thing too?
100%.
And this is a trap that I've fallen into. There's a lot of people who you think or who have the potential to bring you things, and you believe in that potential. And that, again, and I'll touch on this later, but that potential is something that you can find yourself getting lost of in and investing in as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, go on.
No, and it's funny because like I also feel, and I'm being very honest and very transparent, I feel like one part of me taking on gigs was because I never wanted to be that person for you. I wanted to be the person that showed you results and always had something going on, so that you didn't think that it was just potential and me just talking about nothing that never ends up into anything.
For sure.
Anyways, good point. But yeah, creating rules like, okay, I'm going to every Sunday spend 1 hour cleaning, and that is final,
Right.
That's something I'm struggling with, because that's something I want to do, is every Sunday just say no to everything. But we only have Saturday, Sunday to do gigs on the side. So like, how can I erase an entire day? Things like, I am not going to spend more money than so-and-so on whatever, all these things are dealing. I'm not going to go out more than this and this and this. And,
right.
I think that's like probably one of my biggest rule or thing that I'm trying to put into place is rules. And it comes into saying no again, that act of saying no, of who do you say no to again, and ties into what do you actually want to do and what are your values, and reflecting on what are your goals and your ambitions, etc., and try to realign them. But yeah, like you had mentioned, I said do your own rules, but knowing what you need, right? It goes hand in hand, because if you need more time to rest, you need to create that rule in your head. I'm going to nap,
For sure.
And if someone says, hey, can we go out? And you say, yes, you're breaking your own rule. Thus you're not respecting what you need. So
I've actually canceled on people because I was like, yeah, just want to sleep. Like,
and that's what you helped me do with the gig the other day. I was like, I literally made a rule that I'm not taking gigs on in December. Yeah. What did I do? I took on 2 gigs. One gig, which I literally have nothing to do with. And I said, yes. So I literally canceled on her because I was like, I can't take on this gig. One, there's too much work on the plate. But yeah, so 100%.
For sure.
Know your own rules. That's like a recommendation. Also, what I talked about at the beginning in terms of discussing. Right. Having that neutral party, right? Whether it's a counselor, I also have a counselor, by the way. So Danilo is not the only one who's taking all the bullshit that I'm throwing at him.
Yeah, you gotta distribute it evenly.
Yeah, exactly. Also, again, like the element of having something new, but also a balance of something old. Okay, I think is a recommendation of mine. Whatever that interpretation is to you, if it's like at the end of every new gig, you go and grab a coffee. That's something old, right? That's a routine, right? Again, falls into rules. And also this quote that stuck with me and I think has been the biggest lesson that I have learned through this year. I'm going to read this out. This is a quote that it's funny because Sam Colder sort of said this as well in his video, but this is a quote from Jim Quick, I think when he was on Tom Bilyeu's podcast, Impact Theory. So it goes like this. Most of the time, we feel tired not because we've done too much, but because we've done too little of what makes us come alive. And that is exactly, I think, the biggest reason why I'm burnt out. I have done weddings, I have done commercial gigs, I have worked at a terrible job, and I'm working a much better job, and it's in video, but it's still stuff that I'm not exactly passionate about. And the one thing that we came back to and caught us together in fall was we both want to make music.
Yep.
We need to make music. Like, I've put that aside so much. And literally one of your goals at the beginning of the year, if you guys go listen to our New Year's resolution podcast, was for Danilo to hit 1 million streams.
Yeah.
Danilo he released one song after his EP in January, and that's it.
Yeah.
And Danilo's a music producer. Like, one part of that was due to our burnout, part of to the fact that I kept on dragging Danilo in a lot of stuff, which, again, whether you regret that or not, I don't know. But I think we need stuff to make us come alive. And I don't want to do gigs anymore that don't bring me joy.
I mean, disclaimer also, yes, I didn't get to release a lot of things, but there were definitely a lot of projects that I got to make music for that I don't put out there that you might not know that you're out there listening to, but because of some agreements that I've signed, I can't really.
It's lost in the sauce.
Yeah, so maybe I might be at 1 million and I don't even know it. So let's just go with that. Oh my god. Oh no. Oh no.
I
Okay.
just said the forbidden word. That's a forbidden word.
So right before this podcast,
all right,
little thing.
I owe you some money or something.
I literally told Vince I want to take sheesh out of my vocabulary.
I agree. I'm also trying to remove that. Anyways, sorry.
Anyways, gosh, and I don't want to segue too far because I don't want to take away from the impact of that Tom Bilyeu quote. Because and I almost wish that you had said that at the end of this podcast because, or wait. What's
it is the end.
What's editing for? But like, because that's that goes into two of the other things that, I mean, you kind of encapsulated it, but then the two other things that I found were very strong recommendations for me was, and one that I touched on earlier was one, boundary setting, which kind of goes into almost like, rules in a way, because I mean, you do need to allow yourself. Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing too, in terms of like, when you're learning something new, add something old. One of the things that I had written down for myself is like, keeping things fresh. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Cause I felt that one of the things that took me out of burnout, and I feel like I really took myself out of burnout probably when the snow melted. Right? What was happening? Like, restrictions were getting a little better. You and I were taking on so many different things. I was running more. We were beginning to finally go out. We were finally beginning to see people. And I mean, heck, I actually got to go to a couple of music events. We started a bit of things on the film production side. So there was just enough variety. There's just enough variety in my life at that time where I could get excited about things again. You know what I mean? And I really felt like that helped. I know the quote is super cliche to hear, but they say go to where you feel most alive, right? And where I feel most alive is when I'm around other people who look like they're like alive and having a great time. You know what I mean? And for me, and that's one of the things that I am most thankful for being in a field full of creatives, is there are a lot of people out here doing what they're passionate about, yourself included, right? Even as we record this podcast, it's like I'm having a blast because I'm passionate about it, and I can tell you're passionate about it. You know what I mean? So, but again, maybe I can edit this later on, but like, I absolutely wish that he had spoken second after that, because having that Tom Bilyeu quote would have been such a perfect way to wrap it up. But
yeah, and it's a quote by Jim Quick from the Tom
Jim.
Podcast,
my bad.
But yeah, I think that it's again, look, like, all of this is just through reflection. It's through one sort of forcing ourselves to reflect on it by making this podcast, but also just having talked about it so much that it's no longer like something that we're ashamed of, if we can put it that way. So I think that's the number one takeaway for me for like burnout. But coming back to that point of being alive or doing stuff that makes you come alive, it's like the cliche thing of like, do something you enjoy and you'll never work a single day of your life. But there are so many facets of working by yourself or working for yourself that it's impossible to ever end at. Like, making invoices is the last thing I want to do. Absolutely, sending massive emails, I sort of enjoy, but not when I'm stressed out as much as I am. So I also found out that like within videography, photography, and within music, there is certain things that I like to do and certain things I don't want to do, right?
For sure.
And I think just fine tuning that and being okay with making a mistake is also a big takeaway for myself. You know,
for sure.
Like I invested a lot of 2020 and 2021 into other people. Okay, cool. I now know that that is not stuff that I would like to do. If I still continue to do it, I will do it intentionally,
right,
in order to serve a purpose, whether making money or getting me other opportunities, etc. But
for sure.
I now know that that aspect is different, so I won't throw myself head over heels for an opportunity in that area, if that makes sense. So
for sure.
Again, kind of setting those rules, but also taking time to reflect inwards, reflect within.
Yeah, within. There it is.
Damn it! I said it a second time. I'm gonna shoot myself. Okay.
Right before the podcast, you like literally said how you're not gonna say in within.
Oh my god!
And there it is.
But yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to wrap up, but
well, I think for sure, like this retrospective or part 2 of this burnout experience has absolutely been it's been an interesting reflective experience for the both of us, and for me, I can say for sure, like I think you and I have come long ways as both creatives, as both as friends, up and going into 2022, and I think that will I think these mentality switches will help us going into 2022 as we enter the new year. Do you have anything else or?
No, again, this was a very therapeutic experience. I think it was very enlightening. Hopefully whoever's listening to this or watching this on YouTube will have learned something as well. If you guys have comments on something that we said or questions, feel free to let us know. Sure. Comments on YouTube. You can always DM us if you have questions and stuff like that. But yeah, I just want to encourage more discussion. That's why we're doing this, is showing that two guys who not necessarily would appear to have their stuff together, but maybe, if you didn't know us or just saw us online, you might think so. Mm-hmm. Deal with stuff that everyone deals with. So
right. That's what Coffee Chats is all about, really.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. But yeah, just gonna wrap this up with obviously throwing you guys some plugs here. Obviously, subscribe on YouTube or follow us on Spotify if you are not listening to. If you're not already, following us. We also are starting a TikTok, and we are also revamping our entire Instagram. We have an Instagram page now, which looks lit. So you guys should definitely follow, because we're going to be posting a lot of different content as well. We're going to be trying sharing, and it's going to become a little bit more of a fun experience, or a little bit more immersive experience, if I can put it that way. There's going to be a lot more coming our way. But yeah, those are my final words.
Yeah. If you guys want to learn more about burnout, or are interested in learning on how to prevent it, then definitely in the description, you can check out our reference list. We'll be posting a lot of helpful resources that you can check out and mull over in case you're dealing with it. And if you are dealing with it, let us know. And because we're always open to talk about it.
Yeah, because you guys might have a different perspective on burnout. You might have learned something that we could benefit from, and you probably also have a different view on the entire process of going through burnout up and down. So
for sure,
again, we're just doing this to learn. So the more we can learn, the better.
And like we said earlier, it's better to go with it together than alone. So
true. All right. Well, I guess that's a good way to segue out of this podcast, and we're gonna end up with this empty cup cheer.
Cheers.
But yeah, thanks guys for listening.
All right. Cheers, guys. Take care.